All right, so I wanted to talk about the controversy for a minute with these. um, so, as you guys know, I recently submitted a Lego idea. In fact, my first Lego ideas to ever be approved by Lego, which if you want to go support, I will be leaving linked in the description. Already got 100 supporters on it, literally a day. Yeah, cool. But on that model, someone actually, I think 3 people pointed out that I use some of these Mixel sockets in yellow. Now, that is for the sake of presentation for the most part. You know, idea sets often change in color, and it doesn't even have to be a Mixel joint. But what gets me is that people are citing the same Lego briefing, I guess. I don't really know what else to call it, saying that essentially Mixel sockets specifically have to be light gray or dark gray, something to do with the tolerance of pieces and the brittleness or something thereof, right? So that is apparently supposed to help with durability of these pieces. But here's the thing. I've had countless of these break, which is already one thing, but it gets me because I also have bootleg sets from other brands that use toe ball pieces in other colors that are just fine. Now, I get it, you know, every brand uses whatever proprietary ABS that they want, but why would Lego not be able to do the same? So, for example, I have Fancy Nuju, aka just something I threw together over on a shelf here, but on the arms here, it actually has toe ball sockets on axles. Incredibly useful piece, by the way. But that is black, right? Black ABS plastic, I assume. No cracks, no marks, no issues with it at all. Has just a great amount of friction. It feels fine. Will that lose friction over time? Sure, maybe. You know, I don't know. I can't know that until it happens. But why? What is it about gray specifically that allows for these to work when gray also breaks? You know what I'm saying? Because again, this one right here, the reason I don't have anything connected to this one is because it's broken. So there's not a lot of friction in there, and there's a crack and a crease running all the way down the side of it. It's awful. So it just makes me think, like, and it's not the first piece I've had that's been cracked. In fact, several of my Mixel pieces are cracked. Maybe that's something that has been fixed over time because I haven't bought anything with like new Mixel joints in them. So, you know, Lego obviously does things to address these issues sometimes. And so, yeah, it's interesting to say the least. And it just makes me kind of ask myself, you know, what is it about Lego and their history with sockets that causes these sockets to break? It's got to be something to do with the plastic, right? All of the sockets made from Lego, with the exception of one that I can think of offhand, are made of ABS plastic. The one exception, of course, being the bin tin claw here, which is a softer plastic. In fact, it's almost a rubbery material. It's an interesting little piece. Also, I'd say maybe a controversial piece, but it's not bad. It's definitely an interesting one, at the very least. What gets me, though, is this all leads me back to 2007, 2008, because when I put out the video critiquing CCBS as a system, I had a handful of people in the comments tell me, yeah, CCBS has its problems, but at least it's not fragile like Bionicle was. Here's the thing, though. I have a bin up there full of sockets. Specifically older sockets. I usually don't keep sockets from like post 2004 in there because I build classic Rahi. I don't often use colors like dark bluish gray, light bluish gray, right? But I do keep some of those in there as well, just so I have them on hand. That said, of those old sockets, I've never had one break on the socket portion itself. I have had the axle connection break. That's common for a lot of pieces with an axle connection like this specifically, where it is the cutaway, the bushing style of connection. Tons of pieces like that break. And Lego has been getting better at it. They've been addressing and modifying that connection specifically on a lot of Lego pieces. I'm very happy to see that. But it makes me wonder, what experience do these people have with Bionicle that I'm not aware of, right? Because I build classic Rahi, so I use classic sockets far more than I use CCBS sockets. I still have a collection of CCBS sets. I have the Tahoe Uniter sitting next to me from a previous video. And so It just makes me think, how come I can have a set like that built that's newer, that just stands, doesn't really get disassembled, and those sockets crack just from being assembled? Whereas a set from 1999 that has been assembled and never taken apart is fine, has just as much friction as ever. It has to do with the plastic. That's the only common denominator, right? These are different plastics from different eras, and things change over time. Now, that's to be expected. Plastic is going to degrade at some point, so sockets are not a thing that are going to last forever. I can accept that. But when you get something where the sockets maybe break right after building it, that's a problem. That's the issue that we had, obviously, in 2007. That's what caused Lego to revise their sockets in the first place. They had one color that was causing a major issue, lime green. They decided, oh, all new sockets. Let's not fix the color. Let's just change the socket type, which is goofy because they had been using that socket for half a decade at that point, more than almost a decade at that point. And to think one piece in one color specifically is giving us trouble, so let's revise the entire thing and then have all of those break. It's what led me to think that, in part, one reason for Bionicle's end was the sockets. Because here's the thing, a lot of people say, well, it's because of the convoluted story, which, fair. I do think that Bionicle's story gets to be too complicated for newcomers, oftentimes, and that can feel daunting, especially when you have people in the community who are so passionate about that story that when you try to sort of get your foot in the door, you kind of get trampled by other people who already know everything, right? But interestingly, Bionicle wasn't canned. It was, in essence, replaced with Hero Factory, and that's fine, but Hero Factory still used very similar pieces to Bionicle. It was just a different story. And we had 2009, we had Bar Magna, which could have been a different story as well. So when people say, oh, well, it was because of poor sales, if that was true, if that was the sole reason, I should say, then why would Hero Factory replace it? You see what I'm saying? Because sales, I don't think in and of themselves are driven just by story. This video is going in a different direction than I thought, but I'm okay with it. But I also think sales are driven by what it is you're creating, what you're putting on your shelves, right? Hero Factory introduces a lot of new pieces, but does so on the system of the Avmatorid type of build, a system that was developed in 2008. And what interests me is that a lot of people applaud post-2006 Bionicle for introducing new and creative builds, and I do too, but there is one limiting factor, and that is that basically after 2006, we stopped seeing new limbs specifically. Now, the Avmatorin would give us new limbs in the form of a limb with a socket on one side, a ball on the other, and that's a problem when, again, you have introduced this new socket that is inherently fragile. Why do it? That's my question. Because in order to do it, you have to test it. If you didn't test it, that's on you, you know? If Lego as a company decided, oh, we're going to change this socket from one to the other, they had to have stress tested it, right? And if at some point during the stress test they found out, oh, it turns out we greenlit this thing that's very fragile, and now we're already mass producing a dozen of these pieces, hundreds of these pieces, thousands of these pieces, do we want to destroy them and start all over again? Or do we just want to let them go? Makes me wonder that if that was maybe their decision, right? So I do believe in part that the sockets are the main downfall of late Bionicle, because for all of its faults, if you will, 2009 was refreshing. It had colorful builds again, motifs, elements coming back. Even if the characters maybe weren't elemental, you still had characters with ice crystals on the shoulders and rocky helmets and fire swords and things. Something that we kind of had just let go. We had forgotten about the elements themselves being a motif. And so to have seen all of that come back in 2009 only for it to be canned later that year feels weird. And if you're going to do so, only to replace it with a series that also uses the same fragile sockets, and then, of course, change that series, it just makes me think that, I don't think it was just Bionicle. I don't think it was just poor sales. Bionicle was still selling well, even in its lowest years. So, I don't know. I can't know. At the end of the day, it's all speculation. It's all guess, but it's just guesses from experience and from what I have seen come out of this team. Now, that's not to knock Hero Factory. I think it did a lot of good, a lot of ingenious things, even if it's not necessarily my personal, forte. It's not my theme, my fandom, and that's fine. We all have what we enjoy. But in some ways, it is honorary Bionicle, at least that very first wave, right? It is built off of the backs of what Bionicle once was. And so to suggest that, oh, poor sales, you've just rebranded the same thing, if you think about it enough. New characters, new place, but that's also what 2009 was. So it's interesting. That's all I can say. With that said, I do have a couple of other things in this video I want to show super quick. Now that dragged on. So I mentioned in a video from yesterday specifically about storing Thornax. So I decided to actually test this on camera. I needed to find a couple of pieces, which is why I didn't do it in that video. I did finally find them. But there's this system. Well, now this is quite long. I wouldn't honestly do it quite this long, but I don't hate it. The nice thing about this is because it's a modular build, you can honestly make it as long as you want, really. 2 of these tube pieces are rubbery. The other 2 are rigid plastic. And so I just literally have it hanging on a chain. The chain is connected to the character. And I like the aesthetic of this because it's a very mechanical feel, right? It feels like something that was built up. It feels like a cage. It feels like a dedicated thing. But it's not the only storage for Thornax, because someone else had suggested using the Hero Factory flower pod. And I love that idea too, because A, it's not actually a flower pod, it's a cocoon, but it's a flower enough, right? The pieces look the same. And to me, it works so well because Thornax are supposed to be fruit, and it also has kind of a primal feel to it, right? So whereas characters like Akar here or Terex might use that mechanical cage to carry around extra Thornax, and maybe not every character is going to have it, vehicles that they create would probably have these kind of laying off to the side like little pontoons or something. At the same time, I think that characters like the Skrull and like Vorox and maybe some other tribes would prefer the flowers. Just go straight to the source. I think that's such an interesting premise. You could think of it first of all as maybe you can throw the whole pod and it explodes and the Thornax bounce all around all different places. That'd be really cool. I don't know how to make that actually work, but it's an interesting concept at the very least. And it's such a fun use of just a single piece. It's lovely. Another thing that a person had suggested, though, in fact, what had inspired this entire video, was using this right here just to see if it could hold Thornax, which it can. It's a little bit difficult to get them in there or to figure out how to orient them first, getting both of the spike pieces down the center there, but it holds it with a decent amount of force without like squishing the piece, warping the piece, or it getting stuck in there, which makes me wonder if maybe I use this as a Thornax launcher on like one character specifically. Maybe before they had Thornax launchers, they just threw them. And so the idea that I have is creating another, maybe a Gory or something else with an actual gear function. I don't plan on having gear functions for everything, but with a gear function that just lobs the arm and then halts. It just stops it, like it hits a stopper, which the inertia from that should essentially turn it into a catapult, a trebuchet, right? And I think that that's an interesting idea. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this video, guys. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you subscribe. Really helps out the channel. And of course, as always, you can check out Discord, Instagram, and Patreon in the description below. Check out the Patreon, I guess, get some perks. With all that being said, though, of course, you guys have a good one, and let me know in the comments what you guys think of this, or if you have any ideas on what should carry Thornax. They're pretty cool. Later.